Welcome, everyone. We are your fellow presenters, Akina Gonzalez, Michael McKenzie, and McCoyan Rollins. We are here to present on Chapter 6, Leading with Integrity and Moral Purpose, from the text Exploring Leadership for College Students Who Want to Make a Difference, second edition. Let's get right in. So I'm going to read 3 scenarios that ask, what will you do to show leading with integrity? Scenario 1. You are a new participant in a residence hall programming committee. Your committee rents DVDs for one of the major distribution companies to show in the residence halls on a rotating basis during the semester. The committee's regular practice is to copy all of the DVDs that are used. When you ask about this practice, you are told, everyone does it. What do you do? Another scenario. You're in charge of the elections committee in your organization. Your bylaws note that all officers must have a minimum grade point average at the time they are elected. Candidates must sign a statement verifying that they have good enough grades to be eligible for office, but these statements are never checked or verified. Your best friend is running for office and has signed such a form. You know his GPA is lower than the required minimum. In the past, other candidates have signed such a form without having the necessary grades, and this bylaw is considered a joke by the organization. What do you do? A third scenario. You are collecting money for a major campus philanthropy to support cancer research. The daughter of your physics professor is also participating in this project as a member of the philanthropy. You notice that she takes some cash to buy a case of beer at the end of a long day of soliciting donations. What do you do? Let's look at some quotations on leading with integrity. Integrity is the most valuable and respected quality of leadership. Always keep your word, by Brian Tracy. Another quote, a true leader has the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. He does not set out to be a leader, but becomes one by the equality of his actions and the integrity of his intent. Now we'll look at some definitions for leadership, integrity, and ethical. Leadership. Leadership is the ability of an individual or group of people to influence and guide followers or members of an organization, society, or team. Leadership often is an attribute tied to a person's title, seniority, or ranking in a hierarchy. However, it's an attribute anyone can have or attain, even those without leadership positions. It's a developable skill that can be improved over time. Integrity, the quality of being honest and having a strong moral principle that you refuse to change. Let's look at ethical. Ethical is the discipline concerned with what is morally good and bad and morally right and wrong. The term is also applied to any system or theory of moral values or principles. Now we will listen to a under 9-minute video on leaders acting with integrity. Have a listen.
Leadership integrity is one of the most important traits a leader can possess. When your actions match your words, people are more likely to trust and follow you. This means learning about and following the 7 key principles that will help you stay honest and true to your values. By following these principles, you can build trust with your team and lead with integrity. The recent Gallup survey showed that employees in Europe and United States lack trust in their leaders. The employees also fail to understand what their leaders believe, which suggests there is a communication problem between management and employees. The data shows only 40% of employees think their employers would do anything if they brought up concerns about ethics or integrity. Trust is an important factor in the workplace, and when less than half of all employees think their leaders have questionable standards, there's a problem. Leaders need employees' trust for them to lead effectively. If people can't do what it takes because they don't have this vital connection, then how will anything get done? Integrity is a key ingredient in the recipe for success of any organization. We've seen it positively affect many aspects of our lives, including work environments and relationships with others. Leaders who are honest about their intentions can gain greater trust from employees. They're also more successful over time because they don't have any hidden agendas or motives. One of the people I admire most has summarized this in a truly meaningful way. Warren Buffett, one of the most successful investors of all time, said, in looking for people to hire, look for three qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if they don't have the first one, don't even bother with the other two. This really emphasizes the importance of integrity, and I often think about how this translates into real situations. There's a simple exercise that I use regularly to do an integrity check. You can simply answer these questions to check yourself too. Am I responsible for my own behavior? Do I hold myself accountable for the decisions I make? Am I a good role model for my people? Do I follow through on my commitments? If the answer to any of these questions is other than yes, dig deeper into the challenges that cause you to answer maybe or no. While there are many ways to exercise honesty and have strong moral standards, I've put together 7 principles for achieving leadership integrity. Before we dive into the principles, tap that like button and subscribe to my channel for more leadership videos like this one. It lets YouTube know that this video is important to you and will help me reach more people and share my knowledge about leadership. Let's get back to the principles. Nurture a good reputation. We often base leaders' reputation on their performance. I urge you to look beyond the metrics. Good reputation can be built on honesty, reliability, and responsibility. You can also be respectful of your direct reports and other team members. I know you've heard this many times. It takes a lifetime to build good reputation, but a moment to damage it, sometimes irreversibly. One thing to note here is that the leader's reputation also affects company's reputation. Nurture that good reputation and you'll see amazing benefits for everyone around you. Be an outstanding role model. I had many role models in my personal and professional life. One thing that separated great role models from the average ones always fascinated me. They took responsibility to be a good role model. The best thing about it, they always showed it and never told it. Model the behavior that you expect from your people. The benefits are immeasurable and the leadership compounding effect is truly remarkable. Keep high moral standards. Leaders who act with integrity share a set of moral and ethical values. I won't go into the details and the differences between the two. What I saw in highly successful leaders is that they found a balance between what is morally and ethically right. They also stayed away from questionable practices like cutting corners. By leading this way, you will help build trust among your people. They will also absorb good practices and learn which morals and ethics to uphold. Take responsibility for your actions. While this one is often self-explanatory, I have to remind you of it. We all make mistakes, and sometimes things don't work out the way we planned them. That's okay. Instead of hiding your mistakes or blaming others for them, take responsibility. Do your best to fix those mistakes promptly. If you can't fix them right away, learn from that experience and use it to prevent future mistakes. Doing so shows people that you care. It will further build trust among your employees and encourage them to be more open about their own mistakes. Honor your commitment. The best way to earn trust and respect from your people is by being reliable. They want you to stay true to all promises, including those meetings, deadlines, and fulfilling any other commitments. Any commitment you make directly influences your integrity. I want you to be realistic here. Know where the line between yes and no is. Don't commit more than is necessary. It's better to say no to something than getting yourself overcommitted and then not following through on your commitment. Tell the truth, point to hope. Communication is the key to any successful relationship, whether it's with family, friends, or work. You need transparency for everyone around you involved to grow together. The way to lead with integrity is being straightforward and honest. The more information you share, the happier your team will likely feel with their work environment as well. Some of you might disagree with this. Should I really share everything with my people? The answer is, it depends. Sometimes there might be changes in your company and you won't be able to share it with your teams. In this case, share what you can. This is crucial, especially if it will affect people's livelihood. Consistency is vital. I found this to be true on many occasions. All great leaders I know and work with have matching words and actions. Whatever they say, they also do. That is the first part. The second part is to do it consistently. This solidifies the commitment leaders made when they choose to lead. Yes, leadership is a choice. It also shows your team members that leaders who consistently act with integrity can serve as an example. Trust is earned through integrity. A great leader, a trustworthy one, demonstrates this quality. This leads to gaining the confidence of those around them and having their dedicated employees become their strongest supporters. Achieving trust in any situation takes more than just words. Action must speak louder than words. Maintaining a good reputation is essential in any field, but it's especially important for those in positions of trust and authority. As an ethical leader, you set the standard for your team and organization. By following these principles, you can be an outstanding role model and uphold the high moral standards that contribute to a healthy workplace culture. If you want to develop more leadership qualities to build a healthy workplace culture, then I suggest you check out this video next. In it, I share what qualities make a great leader and how leadership integrity is one of the most important traits a leader.
Right. So now that we have just listened to a very insightful video on leaders that act with integrity, let's move on to creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment. Understanding and applying ethical theories and models that operate from organizational values or codes of conduct, as well as being aware of your own moral development and that of others in your organizations, helps to create and sustain ethical organizational environments. Nash says, I should say, he proposed 4 qualities that are necessary for participants to advance ethical standards in an organization. First one, critical thinking skills to analyze and convey the ethical components of a problem or dilemma. Second, a high degree of integrity to stand up for your personal and professional ethics. 3, the ability to see situations from others' perspectives, that is, showing concern for others. 4, personal motivation to do the right thing. These 4 qualities of leadership, when translated into behavior and action, aids in the creation of the process for what is called the relational leadership model. And what is that? What is the relational leadership model about? Well, the relational leadership model emphasizes the relationships among people when leading an organization. Relational leadership values inclusion, empowerment, purposefulness, ethical behaviors, and process orientation. Inclusive leaders consider everyone's viewpoint and experiences when making decisions. While the leader ultimately makes the final decision, all perspectives are weighed carefully. Relational leaders empower others. They see the strengths and weaknesses of each member of their team and work to build on strengths and improve weaknesses. The professional growth of others is important to a relational leader. Relational leaders have a clear purpose, which they are able to communicate to others. Purposeful leaders begin with the end in mind. Everything they do leads to a common goal. Ethical leadership is an important component of the relational leadership model. This means setting a good example and always putting the values of the organization at the forefront. Continuing, all participants, positional leaders, and members alike should be equally empowered to set a tone in the organizational climate that will foster and support ethical and moral actions and sensitivities. The organization's mission or the group's common purpose should be the driving force for identifying its values. Participants should identify and operate from a shared set of core values that guide the organization's activities, actions, and decisions. These core values will enable individuals to work toward a common purpose and provide a common understanding of the organization's principles and standards. Members are empowered to hold each other accountable, participate in moral talk or dialogue, and work together to sustain an ethical environment. With that being said, this takes us to a real example of an organization that creates and sustains an ethical organizational environment. And I would like to welcome you to Sagicor Life Incorporation Trinidad and Tobago Limited. I am a staff member of this company, and this is just an example of front page of our Sagicor Code of Business Conduct and Ethics document. Right, moving on to the next slide. This is an overview of what our Code of Business Conduct and Ethics um, document is all about. It is intended to govern the behavior of all of us, the directors, officers, agents, employees of the Sagicor Financial Corporation, and we are guided by what we call the 7 principles. You can move to the next slide, please. We are guided by these 7 principles, which are duty to self, duty to uphold the law, duty to the corporation, duty to stakeholders and investors, duty to customers, duty to employees, and duty to society. You can move to the next slide. This is what we call our it's an internal document. So each year we have to um, read the code of ethics and sign off on it to indicate that, we will continue to uphold and uphold the all the guidelines within our document, and that we perform duty to self, duty to upholding the law, the corporation, to our shareholders, etc. So this is just a example of our organization, trying to maintain and create and sustain that ethical organizational environment. We will now move on. You can turn to the next slide. We will now move on to moral purpose as an act of courage. Morals are principles and beliefs concerning what is right and wrong behavior. Lucas and Cower says, it takes personal courage to do the right thing. Kidder also defines it as moral courage is described as the quality of mind and spirit that enables one to face up to ethical challenges firmly and confidently without flinching or retreating. Another description is moral courage can be viewed as the intersection of three conceptual fields: principles, danger, and endurance. I would like to show you an example of a real life person who would have taken what we call um, an act of courage. This is Miss Sharon Watkins. She wrote a book, she's a leadership and ethics advocate, professor of practice at UNC. However, next slide, please. However, Ms. Watkins is the former executive of Enron, where she displayed personal courage when she exposed breaches of conduct by her boss, Kenley. And in doing so, Ms. Watkins would have risked losing her high-paying job. She showed both personal courage and integrity in taking a stand against the unethical practices of Enron. And I would like to share with you under 4-minute video of her, giving a synopsis of her journey at Enron.
The alarming thing for so many of us that worked at Enron was the depth of the moral bankruptcy of the company. Because on December 3rd, Enron laid off over 4,000 people 3 weeks before Christmas with nothing, with a hint and a promise at a $4,000 severance check, which doesn't get you very far, a hint and a promise that you could buy your own COBRA insurance if the bankruptcy judge approved a payment to the insurance company. All these employees heard, last Friday was your last paycheck, go back to your desk, clear out your personal items, and go. Come to find out, in January 2002, it was disclosed that nearly 25 executives paid themselves nearly $55 million the last week before bankruptcy. One person got $8 million, another person $5 million, a couple people got $1.5 million. There were several $750,000 amounts. Now, this was to stay at the company for 3 months till the end of February. Now, that was just an outrageous amount of money to stay for 3 months. These executives gave themselves a 3 to 5 year cushion. Their annual base pay, usually at Enron, the maximum base pay was about $250,000. So these executives gave themselves quite a large cushion and then had the gall to stand up in front of thousands of other employees and say, bye-bye, it's 3 weeks before Christmas. Sorry you don't have anything more from us. It's been great working with you. Sorry to have to do this. And that's outrageous. I just think those top guys that made the decision to do such large bonuses are just as crooked as Andy Fastow. They stuck their hand in that cash drawer the week before bankruptcy and piled as much cash in their pockets as they could. And that was so alarming. Now, of course, that was in the press. There's been a deferred compensation scandal. There's been various scandals, but actually part of the reason for doing the book on my behalf was to show a real human story of how many good, smart people could see warning signs but still stay. And so Mimi, using me as a character in the book, she shows that even as early as 96, I saw some aggressive accounting that made me very uncomfortable. However, when the stock price is rising, your pay is good, the business trips are lavish, and when your business leaders, your top guys are on the front page of Business Week or Forbes or Fortune, it's really easy to say, I'm going to put those nagging concerns behind. Maybe I just don't get it. Maybe I'm just a little old-fashioned in my accounting theories, and the world is changing. And it's very easy to stick with that company. And I'll give you for instance of that. The most recent corporate scandal is Health South.
Aquino? Okay, moving on. Another
Oh
real
God,
life
sorry about
example.
that. I was muted. Sorry. I apologize.
Oh,
Apologize.
okay.
I would like to give you another real life example. This is Mr. Nelson Mandela, former South African president. Next slide. It took moral courage for Mr. Nelson Mandela to have been imprisoned for 27 years for his opposition to the apartheid in South Africa. Mandela, affectionately known as Madiba, his Xhosa clan name, fought against the racist apartheid system in his homeland and for equality and freedom for all people. And I would like to share with you my last video under 4 minutes of the biography of Mr. Nelson Mandela. Enjoy.
Our major weapon of struggle against apartheid oppression and exploitation is our people organized into mass formation of the democratic movement.
Nelson Mandela was an anti-apartheid activist and the first black president of South Africa. He was born Holy Hlahla Mandela on July 18, 1918, in the rural village of Mvezo. A descendant of the Tembu royal family, Mandela's father served as a local chief and counselor to the king. His devout Christian mother enrolled him in a Methodist school, where he was given the English name Nelson. After his father's death, the 12-year-old Mandela was brought to the center of the Tembu monarchy to be raised by the king's regent. Living among the royal family exposed Mandela to powerful examples of black leadership that remained a source of influence throughout his life. Mandela attended the University College of Fort Hare and studied law at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. The school's only black student and a frequent target of racism, Mandela soon began to immerse himself in the world of radical politics. In 1944, he joined the African National Congress, an anti-colonialist political party that fought to enfranchise and empower the black population living under an oppressive white authority. Mandela helped to found the ANC's Youth League and quickly rose in its ranks alongside fellow activists Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu. With the National Party's rise to power in 1948, South Africa's racial inequality was officially codified under the system of apartheid. The government passed legislation that institutionalized discrimination and enforced the supremacy of the minority white population. Mandela and the ANC fought back, launching the Defiance Campaigns of 1952, a series of nonviolent direct actions uniting Black, Indian, and communist coalitions through coordinated civil disobedience. The National Party swiftly cracked down on their efforts, jailing Mandela and banning him from the ANC. Before long, the campaign had died out. In 1956, Mandela and 155 colleagues were tried for treason. While they were ultimately acquitted, Mandela became convinced that apartheid would not fall without armed resistance. In 1961, he formed the MK, a militant branch of the ANC that committed targeted acts of sabotage against the government and its military. The MK's guerrilla tactics were effective, but in August 1962, Mandela was captured. Charged with conspiracy, he received a life sentence. Incarcerated at Robben Island, Mandela remained a symbol of Black South African resistance. During his years behind bars, he continued his fight on a smaller scale, organizing against the prison's inhumane conditions through demonstrations and teach-ins. Calls for Mandela's freedom gradually built up global support, and South Africa's government buckled under growing pressure. Finally, in 1990, after 27 years, Mandela was released from prison. South Africa held its first open elections in 1994. The African National Congress, led by Mandela, won in a landslide. As president, Mandela prioritized national programs that expanded access to social services, education, and housing. His administration also established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which served to investigate and confront human rights violations committed under apartheid. At the end of his first term in 1999, Mandela retired from politics. He continued to commit himself to activism, particularly in response to the AIDS crisis, until the end of his life. In 2013, Mandela died of a respiratory infection at age 95. he still stands as both the father of his nation and an international symbol of hard-won liberation.
Ah, boy, what a great man of courage. What a great man of courage. So let's sum it up. Next slide. And you can move on to the next slide. Kidda says, moral purpose as an act of courage is having an awareness of danger. Having an awareness of danger is key in possessing moral courage. A willingness to endure some type of hardship, such as risking losing friends or a job, is a component of moral courage. The opposite would be doing or saying nothing or turning away when faced with ethical dilemmas. So therefore, moral purpose as an act of courage is really upholding one's principles and putting them into action, which allows leaders to operate with moral courage. And I would like to hand over to Mr. Michael Mackenzie, our next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. So we want to dive straight into the assumptions about ethical leaderships. All right, and Lucas Ananelio, 1995, asserted that centers on ethical consideration highlights values aligning between personal and organizational values and character development. And they developed some keys that we should look for when we assumption on ethical leadership. So we're looking at ethics at the core. Effective leadership integrates ethical components, emphasizing integrity in both process and outcome. Then we look at also value-driven leadership, another attribute. Leadership is inherently followed values, guiding individuals and organizations based on belief of what is right and fair. 3, personal and organizational values. Ethic leadership begins by aligning personal values with organizational values, using a moral compass to navigate ethical challenges. Learning ethical leadership. Ethical leadership is a learned process involving experience, reflection, and application, emphasizing the importance of trial and error experiences. Connecting between thoughts and actions. Next one. Ethical leadership requires linking moral reasons with a value and action, encouraging practical application of ethical theories in real life situations. We could all attest to this. Character development, something we should look for in our bosses, our leaders, our directors. A leader character is defined by action, necessitating consistency between stated values and behavior, emphasizing the importance of authenticity, shared ethical responsibilities, which is another key. Ethical leadership is a collective effort involving all members in fostering an inclusive environment for active participation in ethical decision making. Role modeling influences. Leaders' actions serve as powerful role modeling, influencing ethical climate in organizations, emphasizing the impact of leadership behavior. In essence, ethical leadership is a shared value-driven process involving continuous learning, personal growth, and cultivation of integrity-focused culture with an organization or community. And now we're going to share small videos on ethical leadership.
In this course, we turn to a discussion of 5 principles of ethical leadership, the origins of which can be traced back to Aristotle. Although not inclusive, these principles provide a foundation for the development of sound ethical leadership: respect, service, justice, honesty, and community. Immanuel Kant suggested that it's our duty to treat others with respect. To do so means always to treat others as ends in themselves and never as means to ends. Leaders who respect others also allow them to be themselves with creative wants and desires. They approach other people with a sense of their unconditional worth and valuable individual differences. Respect includes giving credence to others' ideas and confirming them as human beings. Respect means that a leader listens closely to followers, is empathetic, and is tolerant of opposing points of view. It means treating followers in ways that confirm their beliefs, attitudes, and values. Leaders who serve are altruistic. They place followers' welfare foremost in all of their plans. The idea of leaders serving others was more deeply developed and explored by Robert Greenleaf, who developed the servant leadership approach. Servant leadership has strong altruistic ethical outcomes and overtones in how it emphasizes that leaders should be more attentive to the concerns of their followers and should care for them and nurture them. These and other ethical leaders must be willing to be follower-centered, must place others' interest foremost in their work, and must act in ways that will benefit others.
Thank you. Next slide. Okay, we went into the assumptions about ethical leadership, cultural assumptions. While the assumptions presented by Lucas and Anelio in 1995 still holds relevance to its importance to note that the field of ethical leadership has evolved and new perspectives have engaged since then. Some additional insights and development in the understanding of ethical leadership includes cultural dynamics. This is the assumption about ethical leadership, which needs to examine in context of cultural diversity. Different cultures may have distinct ethical values and perspectives on leadership. Leaders must be culturally intelligent and adaptable to navigate the complexity of diverse ethical expectations. We're looking at something else here, another point, globalization impact. Globalization has intensified interconnectedness, making ethical leadership a global concern. Leaders need to consider the impact of their decisions, not only on a local scale, but also in a broader international context. Understanding and respecting diverse cultural norms is crucial for effective ethical leaderships on a global scale. Technological ethics. And we know all this about this now because we're in that age of technology. With the rapid advancement of technology, ethical leadership now extends to consideration relates to data privacy, cybersecurity, and the responsibility use of artificial intelligence. Leaders need to address emerging ethical challenges posed by technological innovations and ensure that their organization adhere to ethical standards in the digital age. Next slide. Continuous learning and adaptation. The notion of learning ethical leadership has evolved.
Sorry, Michael, go ahead. Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, cool. Continuous learning and adaptations. The notion of learnable ethical leadership has evolved in emphasizing continuous learning, adaptability, and the openness of feedback. Leaders are encouraged to engage on an ongoing self-reflection, learning from experiences, and staying attuned to evolving ethical challenges. In summary, ethical leadership remains a dynamic and evolving field, shaped by cultural, technological, and global changes. Leaders are now expected to navigate in an increasingly complex ethical landscape while demonstrating a commitment to inclusivity, sustainability, and social responsibility. Next. Moving on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, ethical theories and moral purpose. Ethics are culturally bound and context dependent, lacking universal agreements. Practice considered ethical in one culture may be viewed differently elsewhere, as exemplified by the treatment of women in Saudi Arabia. Ethical standards also evolve over time, with past practices now deemed illegal and immoral. Attempts to establish universal morals values face challenges as cultural differences and moral views vary among individuals and nations. Cultural tolerance is crucial, emphasizing understanding with imposing benefits. Corruption culturally constructs vary in tolerance globally, ranking like the Corruption Perception Index highlighted these differences. Public opinion surveys such as the Global Corruption Barometer reveals perception of corruption and it impacts the different sectors. These insights underscore the nuisance and culturally sensitive nature of ethical consideration in leadership. Moving on. This is a short video on ethics and versus morals. Enjoy.
When discussing communication ethics, it's important to understand exactly what is meant by ethics. Sometimes people confuse ethics with behaving in accordance with social conventions, religious beliefs, and the law. And sometimes the term ethics and morals are used interchangeably because they clearly are both related to right and wrong. However, they are not the same thing at all. Ethics refer to rules provided by an external source. They are governed by professional and legal guidelines within a particular time and place. Ethics are all about how we deal with gray areas. And ethics therefore refer to the value judgments we make on bigger and smaller matters, in communication as well as in other fields. A concrete example of ethics are codes of conduct in workplaces. Lawyers, policemen, and doctors all have to follow an ethical code laid down by their profession, regardless of their own feelings or preferences. In a specific communication setting, we can say that the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics is a very good example. In this code, several principles of ethical journalism are included, with instructions on how to behave as an objective, transparent, and reliable journalist. In this code of ethics, we find principles such as seek truth and report it, and minimize harm for sources, subjects, colleagues, and members of the public. Morals refer to an individual's own principles regarding right and wrong. For example, a journalist may exaggerate a little to create a more sensational story. These principles are not written in legal guidelines, but are subject to one's own gut feelings about what is good or bad. And of course, most decisions are not captured in a code of conduct, but ask for people's personal cultural norms for dealing with issues. Then you really must trust your own moral compass. When we study people's principles about what is good or bad, we find two forms of ethics, descriptive and prescriptive ethics. The crucial difference between these principles is describing or explaining behavior versus guiding or prescribing behavior. Descriptive ethics are concerned with what is. They are also known as comparative ethics. This is the scientific study of moral beliefs and practices of different people and cultures in various places and times in order to describe how people behave and think when dealing with moral issues and arguments. The essential question in this form of ethics is, what do people think is right in a certain place, time, or situation? Prescriptive ethics are all about what ought to be. Therefore, this form is also known as normative ethics. This is the study of principles, rules, or theories that guide our actions and judgments in order to determine what actually is morally right or wrong. The essential question in this form of ethics is, how should people act? And of course, we need to apply this distinction between two forms of ethics in the field of communication. For example, we could state that descriptive ethics would be used when determining what proportion of tabloid journalists believe that it is no problem to invade the personal privacy of celebrities in order to boost sales. On the other hand, normative ethics would be used to determine whether it is correct to hold such a belief.
Thank you. Hope you all gained something from that video. So we will now move on to the next subtopic, which is transforming leadership theory. And when you look at this, James McGregor Burns' transforming leadership theory emphasizes ethics and morals. Learning from your last video, defining leadership as a process where leaders and followers elevate each other to a higher level of morality and motivation. Transforming leadership focus on end value like peace, fairness, and justice, influencing these ideas through specific behavior. The theory revolves around the symbolic relationship between leaders and followers, emphasizing shared value and moral purposes. Transforming leaders exhibit courage, facing reality even when painful, and are value-driven, inspiring others through consistent action aligned with their core values. Leading with moral purpose involves making ethical decisions, even if unpopular, as we saw from Ms. Gonzalez, even if unpopular, and modeling behaviors that set standards for others to follow. There's a video that I would like everyone to look at that emphasizes this point. Next.
One more time, which type of leader are you, and why does it matter all that much? So earlier today, I was in a conversation with two executives from a compensation and benefits company. And I get it, right? Pay matters. We need to reward people who work hard with the compensation that they deserve. But they asked me a lot of questions that really sort of signaled a mentality that they were perhaps not in the right mind when it came to how do you effectively lead and motivate a team? How do you, especially when you're trying to do something that seems impossible, how do you actually rally the troops, motivate, and unite your team? You see, almost 50 years ago, we started to figure out that there were really two types of leader. And you know, because you probably saw my video on personality testing, that I actually hate the term types. So let's not use the term types, but let's say there are two sort of patterns of behavior or two underlying beliefs about how to lead followers. And most leaders, most managers, most senior executives, most entrepreneurs, most executive directors of nonprofits lead towards one of these patterns of behavior or another. And as I said, this idea started, actually, hang on. Nope, that's not it. Here it is. So this idea started almost 50 years ago with a book called Leadership. I know, it's a pretty boring title, isn't it? With a book called Leadership by James McGregor Burns. Burns was a political scientist and a failed politician, actually. And he had written previous works as a historian, as well as a political scientist, really a jack of all trades. He had posited that there were two different ways that leaders attain followers. Specifically looking at presidential candidates and other politicians, there were two different ways that people built the movement. The first type of leader would talk about what they could get followers if they decided to join their movement. They would talk about the money involved. They would talk about the rewards that you would get for being a part of the movement. They would talk about how your particular group is being underrepresented and we can get you more benefits. And Burns didn't come out and call them this, but later people building off his theory would call them transactional leaders. They were basically saying, if you do this, I will do this. In politician speak, if you vote for me, I will bring you these things. In terms of corporate leaders or leaders of movements, it was, if you follow me, you will get this reward. The problem in most organizations, of course, is that if you're going to be a transactional leader, then leading just by bribes doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to lead by punishment as well. Sometimes you have to say, if you don't do these certain things, then I'm going to extract this punishment or withhold this reward. You can't just use diamonds. Sometimes you got to use clubs. Burns would take that category of leader and contrast that with a leader who really sought to bring out the best in their people, who really encouraged them to see a picture of a better world that they could build together. And yes, there would be some benefit to that. But the goal of this style of leadership wasn't to bribe people into compliance or punish them into compliance. It was to capture their hearts and their minds. Now, later historians would call these people transformational leaders. And you can probably already sense where this is going. A lot of research since Burns first wrote his book has looked to transformational leadership theory as a far better way, not only to get action or motivation out of employees, but a far more ethical way to deal with people as well. So what is transformational leadership? Well, later historians would build off of Burns's ideas and really identify 4 characteristics of transformational leaders. These are sometimes called the 4 I's. We'll call them the 4 high cards when you're capturing the heart. So there was this idea of idealized influence. And idealized influence is really just that you walk the walk. Idealized influence is that you as a leader are the type of person that followers want to be, and also that your actions and your words are congruent with the movement that you're asking people to lead. We've all actually seen those sort of politicians who argue for a certain platform position because now they're running a race at a higher level, but when they were at a lower level, they had the exact opposite, the flip-floppers. Idealized influence is the exact opposite of that flip-flop. You have been consistent in your beliefs, and your current actions and movements are not only something in line with the movement you're trying to start, but something that followers aspire to be like. You are a role model. You have idealized that influence. The next characteristic was inspirational motivation. This is something that we might often refer to as charisma. It's the idea that you can cast a vision, a compelling vision of what the future will look like if you actually lead this movement to success. This is where most of us focus on inspiration. This is where most of us focus on these grandiose speeches, and speeches like the I Have a Dream speech or JFK's speech about placing a man on the moon are a great example of inspirational motivation. But we also know that you can't just cast a vision to lots of different people and expect to have success, because the third element of transformational leadership is individual consideration. In casting that vision, have you painted people's ability to see what you see on an individual level? Do they feel included in that mission? And also, do they feel like you know them, that you understand where they're coming from, their challenges that they're about to engage in when they take on this new mission? Do they feel like they know you? And the last element of transformational leadership is what is often called intellectual stimulation, which is quite simply the ability to push for innovative or creative thinking, the ability to challenge that status quo. Are you asking people to think the exact same way that they thought before you came on the stage trying to lead this movement, or are you pushing their thought patterns to higher levels? Now, if we take these 4 all together, idealized influence, inspirational motivation, individual consideration, and intellectual stimulation, then we begin to approach what is a true transformational leader. We begin to become the leader that James McGregor Burns wrote about, in contrast to that transactional one. And what we find, and what I was trying to persuade my colleagues in compensation and benefits, is that this matters far more than getting the incentive compensation scheme right. If you get that right, the best thing you can do is increase satisfaction. The best thing you can do is make people feel like they're treated fairly. And I want to emphasize here that it is hugely important to make sure people feel like they're treated fairly. But you're not going to build a movement on fair compensation. You're going to build a movement on transformational leadership. At the same time, though, these 4, look, it's a lot to remember. What if we could just boil it all down to the one thing you need to remember? 4 things is kind of difficult. So is there one thing you can do that will set you on the path to being a transformational leader? Is there one thing, one action you can take, or one use of rhetoric you can use to begin to build that movement? And I truly believe that there is. And if you follow my work, you'll know that for me, that ace of spades is picking the right fight. Specifically when it comes to transformational leadership, I believe what I call the revolutionary fight is the beginning of transformational leadership. The revolutionary fight simply says the whole industry or the whole of society or our current status quo finds this thing acceptable, and we refuse to accept that any longer. Whatever it is, we refuse to accept that we're not taking care of the least of these, or we refuse to accept the idea that safety shouldn't be a priority in industrial manufacturing, or we refuse to believe that some level of gender inequity is acceptable in business. Leaders who consistently paint an idea that We, by operating as a business, by operating as an organization, we are fighting against that status quo that says this thing is acceptable, but we find it unacceptable, begin revolutions. And by the way, the examples that I just gave you, those are real life examples. And that's really what's at the core of transformational leadership. Can you pick a fight? Can you pick a revolutionary fight? Can you convince people that you are not just wanting to lead an organization, but lead a movement? Can you do that by idealized influence and individual consideration and inspirational motivation and intellectual stimulation? But more importantly, can you do that because you've walked the walk and your life is in line with that fight? People don't want to join a company, they want to join a crusade. And the people who pick revolutionary fights become transformational leaders. The people who stay in the mentality that people just work for pay, and so we need to offer them bribes or punishments, those leaders have a much harder time acquiring the right talent, motivating that talent, retaining that talent. They have a much harder time actually leading the organization. That's what Burns found out almost 50 years ago, and that's what we're finding out in countless studies of transformational leadership today. In fact, we might even go so far as to say this about transactional leaders. When you compare them to transformational leaders, they really just end up looking like jokers. One more time, which type of leader?
Thank you. Moving on. We're looking at modeling, which is the last slide, modeling moral purpose. And it speaks about social learning theory rooted in Bandura's work, explaining how individuals learn through observation, vicarious learning. Models in organization influence ethic or unethical behavior, impacting the decision-making process. Participants tend to imitate behaviors of admired leaders. We see this all the time, shaping ethical practices. Behavioral modeling has implications for organization ethics, as exemplars can set standards for ethical decision-making. This process, known as vicarious learning or behavioral modeling, has external effects, shaping the ethical climate beyond organization boundaries. Positive examples like Ben & Jerry's socially responsible initiatives inspire others, while negative instances such as discriminatory practices by companies like Walmart highlight the modeling in an organization ethics. Overall, leaders and participants influence ethical climate by modeling behavior or engaging in discussion on ethical issues. We have one last video, it's very short, so you can just listen to it. And we'll move on to Ms. Rollins.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
In the corporate world, staying ahead means constantly adapting and learning. But how can we make corporate training more effective? Enter Bandura's social learning theory. In the 1960s, Albert Bandura, a renowned psychologist, proposed this theory, suggesting that people learn not only from direct experiences, but also by observing and imitating others. The theory suggests that observation and modeling play a primary role in how and why people learn. Let's see how this theory can be applied in the world of corporate training. Step 1 is creating role models. Identify exemplary employees who embody the skills, behaviors, and values your organization promotes. Step 2 is observational learning. Encourage trainees to observe and learn from these role models through video demonstrations, live sessions, or mentorship programs. Step 3 is encouraging imitation. Provide opportunities for trainees to practice what they've learned. This could include simulations, workshops, or hands-on experiences. Step 4 is feedback and reinforcement. Constructive feedback and positive reinforcement are crucial. It helps trainees refine their skills and boosts their confidence. In conclusion, Bandura's social learning theory can be a game changer in corporate training. By promoting observational learning, encouraging imitation, and providing feedback, your organization can empower its employees to reach new heights. So, if you want to foster a culture of continuous learning and development, consider applying Bandura's. In the corporate world, staying ahead means constant.
Hi,
Okay,
good
thank
evening,
you.
everyone.
I just want to pass you on to Ms. Rollins, and she will continue with the slides. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel. Thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. I would like to touch on moral talk, ethical decision-making models, and some practical applications, ethical principles and standards. So I'm going to start with moral talk, and I've added and dialogic leadership. Moral talk and dialogic leadership are phrases that were first used by Frederick Bird and James Waters in 1989. But what do they mean? They represent action taken by someone in the group who takes the lead to start a conversation of ethical importance in a positive way. So many of us face ethical situations without acting, or perhaps there's a discussion going on and we're silent and in the background. Bird and James also coined a term for this lack of action. It's called moral muteness. Why do people choose to be morally mute? There may be many reasons, but perhaps the particular issue in discussion may be a complex one, and you have decided that you just don't want to get involved in that one. Also, a person may consistently avoid dealing with ideological or moralistic perspectives or arguments. There are also people who are ethically illiterate. If you're in an organization, perhaps the person that you're dealing with may be standing in for the actual decision maker who may be quite flexible in dealing with moral issues. But we do harm if we choose not to speak up. Potential harm can be caused by not modeling moral talk through conversations or discussions. We will get the neglect of moral abuses, we can develop an environment that is indifferent to moral considerations. Simply, to say this differently, when we refuse to take action or say something, we encourage moral abuse. We have seen from time to time others looking the other way, or perhaps looking on and seemingly indifferent to an unethical issue. When we look away, we neglect the moral abuse occurring right in front of us, and we become indifferent to moral considerations. The term modeling simply refers to behavior that is demonstrated by a dialogic leader. The one person in the group who chooses to stand up and say something, thereby encouraging other people to choose to model his or her behavior by stepping forwards. And it's everybody's business to initiate moral talk or dialogic leadership. Moral expressions have the potential to arouse feelings of connection with moral action. In other words, others may choose to follow your example. However, for that to occur, communication must be positive and natural. So you may speak about experiences, personal experiences. You may share those, and the discussion cannot devolve into something that's negative. Moral talk can be used as a type of modeling influence when the dialogue is used to identify problems, consider issues, advocate and criticize policies, and justify and explain decisions. Leaders and participants can use moral talk to influence others to carefully consider their perspectives and positions on issues. So we're going to look at ethical decision-making models. This section opens by re-emphasizing that leadership is a process and not a person in a leadership role. The leadership process is filled with daily ethical dilemmas and problems that don't have readily identifiable solutions, and leaders and participants need to confront these issues in order to resolve them. It further reminds us about the relational leadership model. Everyone in the process, whether your position is that of the leader or the participant or follower, everyone in the process needs to be reflective, challenging, caring, purposeful, and consultative when working through ethical issues. One approach that is widely used today to help resolve ethical dilemmas in the professional world is the development of professional codes of conduct. As we've seen, lawyers use them, religions use them, medical and counseling professionals have their own standards. Organizations and schools also have policies and codes of conduct. An example at COSTAT would be COSTAT's guidelines for appropriate online class behavior. But you probably won't be able to apply codes of conduct or ethical guidelines to every situation that you encounter. And this is why we need the participation of every human being involved in the process, because only human judgment can ultimately resolve ethical issues. So, as I said a short while ago, codes and guidelines won't be applicable to every ethical dilemma that you encounter. Perhaps because one can only apply those codes to right versus wrong scenarios. Rushworth Kidder, who is founder of the US-based Institute for Global Ethics, in 1995, he wrote, "Tough choices are those that pit one right value against another. The really tough choices then do not center upon right versus wrong. They involve right versus right. They are genuine dilemmas precisely because each side of the problem is firmly rooted in one of our basic core values." So Kidder further goes on to give us the four dilemma paradigm model for right versus right scenarios or arguments. They are justice versus mercy, short term versus long term, individual versus community, and truth versus loyalty. They remind us that we are not always fighting good versus bad. And I'm going to cover very briefly three examples that occur in the book. In 1990, Terry Schiavo fell down in her house, and for the next 15 years, she was kept on life support while she remained unconscious. Eventually, Terry's parents and husband went to court to fight each other. Terry's parents wanted the right to keep Terry alive artificially, while her husband wanted to fight for the right to allow her to die naturally. In Terry's scenario, the values of justice versus mercy clashed, and that court case aroused public debate about the moral and legal rights of life and death. I don't know how many of y'all remember Elian Gonzalez. He's a man today, but when he was a boy, he survived crossing the Atlantic to the US on a boat. His mother, who accompanied him, died on the journey. In the United States, Elian's family wanted him to stay in the US, while his father wanted Elian returned to him in Cuba. Those events surrounding Elian Gonzalez caused national debates within the United States and earned international attention and coverage. It ended when Elian was forcibly removed from his Floridian family by US authorities and returned to his father. The values of this case were both justice versus mercy and individual versus community. One final example is David Kaczynski, who turned his brother into the FBI because he suspected his brother Theodore was the Unabomber in the United States. Theodore Kaczynski would eventually confess to being the Unabomber. So the Unabomber was a US domestic terrorist who either hand-delivered or mailed in bombs to universities across the United States over a 17-year period. These bombings resulted in 3 deaths and many more injuries. The values in conflict here were truth versus loyalty. Now, I'd like to cover 3 principles for ethical decision making. Most people follow these principles when they make decisions. So we have ends-based thinking, also referred to as utilitarianism. It is understood by the maxim, do whatever produces the greatest good for the greatest number. At its core, you must examine the consequences first before taking action. And then we have rule-based thinking. This is firmly based on one sense of duty. In other words, you feel obliged to follow the rules or the laws in determining the issues that you face. And then we have care-based thinking. Love for your fellow man comes before all other considerations. You follow the maxim, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. It asks you to put yourself in another person's shoes before you make your decision. Okay. These are simple but powerful ethical standards that can be used when faced with ethical dilemmas. They have been around for a long time, serving as ethical foundations of fields such as biomedicals, physicians, and counselors. Applying these principles or standards can help you to determine the correct course of action. Respecting autonomy, recognizing that individuals has his or her right to freedom of choice, right to freely develop his own or her own values, and the right to act independently. Autonomy does not imply unrestricted freedom. However, a major assumption of autonomy is that individuals possess a certain level of competence to be able to make rational and informed decisions, doing no harm or non-malfeasance, providing an environment that is free from harm to others, both psychological and physical. All members agree to refrain from engaging in actions that will risk harming others, benefiting others, or beneficence, promoting the interests of the organization, group, or in general others above yourself or your own interests. Justice, treating people with fairness and equality, and fidelity, which is keeping promises, being faithful, being loyal to the group or organization that you belong to. We can all agree, ladies and gentlemen, that leading with integrity and moral purpose at all times can be difficult. Professional codes of conduct have been around for a very long time, and if used correctly, they can protect professionals from pressures that could lead to questionable conduct. However, when faced with right versus right situations, we can apply the three principles for ethical decision making, or the five ethical principles or standards. One final test to consider is called the newspaper test. Ask yourself whether you would want your actions to appear in the newspaper before acting them out. In conclusion, the ethical models discussed in this chapter alone will not necessarily help you resolve every dilemma that you encounter. They simply are a framework. They simply are a framework to guide your decision making. They do not provide the moral imagination and creative thinking that are needed to address complex situations. You do. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for participating in our presentation. This brings us to the end of our presentation on Chapter 6, Integrity and Moral Purpose in Leadership. On behalf of the team, I wish to thank you for your participation. Mr. Bisu?
All right, if there are no questions, I'll stop the recording.